As per usual, we practice through standing, slow movement, micro movement, just allowing the body to recognise the posture on a structural level. So not just the hand moving, but the whole structure integrating. And you can only do that when you can feel your whole body, so you don't want to bludgeon that out with fast movement straight away. And from there, let's escalate our pace of training. We have enough now to assimilate these postures just from simple explanations. So follow on these drills. So remember, we have an A setting and a B setting, and the B setting is going to lean us one way, the A setting is going to lean us the other. A setting is usually better for striking, B setting is usually better for just bracing in with a little bit more strength against the target. That's just a general rule. There's exceptions, there always is, and you'll find some yourself where the A setting and the B setting, or the brace setting and the gap Farley setting, are actually the same context. So there's a few examples of that. So a hook, for instance, a hook punch, lead hand hook, if you want to hit with the hook or you want to hit and push in with force, they both use open. So the A setting and the B setting is the same in that case for gap and brace Farley. There's all these exceptions, just like sometimes the wrong dog turns up, at which point you have to work out which is the right dog. And this happens because, just like we can have a dominant context, we can have a dominant technique. So in this case, the lead hand parry isn't the dominant technique, that's just like the intermediate move that takes down the guard, as we've seen. And the dominant technique is going to be the rear hand cross. So that's why we're using close, and that's why the posture looks a bit odd and crooked, because we're taking down the lead hand and then moving into the cross. So as we compound the movement, we're using close for a lead hand technique, which is B setting, but close is also the A setting, the dominant setting for the cross, because really we're just doing a cross but adding the parry on the beginning. And you can see the difference here. If we change to the rear hand, then close is its dominant context, it's a rear hand posture. So if we wanted to do a cross from here, for example, we'd have to do something like use quarter rooting. But for now, just notice the footwork. Notice the difference between whether you land on the pivot root and kickback rooting or whether you land on a flat foot. The pivot root lets you get your hand over to the centre line much more easily than keeping the back foot flat. And if you try and keep the flat foot rooting and then get the hand over to the centre line, you can see how it just unbalances, it twists the whole posture and makes it less balanced. If we do a very short posture, remember that we will keep the flat foot rooting because it allows us to hard set the posture, get more power into a smaller movement, but you won't need to bring the hand over as far to the centre line in that case. And it's easy to balance anyway if you're doing a bit of a larger step in and you want a little bit of a reach to just get that foot up on the back foot, gives you that little bit of extended reach. But if it's a short movement, remember we can keep the foot completely flat, and that allows us to transmit more force to a smaller movement by hard setting the posture, i.e. the ball of the foot posture will allow a lot more force to be dissipated than a hard set with the heel. And because it's such a small movement, we can create what we call a distributed set, which means that this set happens over a longer space of time because one heel hits and then the other heel hits, and they can both hard set down into the ground at a similar but not exact time. And what we do with the lead foot, although you can't really see it, we have to lift up so that we use the seeking step. So the ball of the foot will hit first, but then we just use that to just hammer down the lead rear heel, which you can see if you look carefully, and that just also helps to just add into the set, because it just, as the heel hits down into the floor, the force transmission occurs. Or more accurately, the posture solidifies across the distributed set, so you can see the lead foot and then the rear foot. That's the set. It's comprised of both heels hitting the floor. And here's some different variations. So first of all, an echo step, which I'll look at in detail at the moment, and then next a push step. So the rear leg comes forward first, pushes the front foot out, call that a push step, and then a short push step into a lead pivot root. So they're all standard Yiquan footwork techniques, but they're all slightly different, so watch carefully. So the foreshortened push step is obviously just if your legs are going to clash with your opponent's legs, you just need to do it shorter. You can just pull it in like that. This was a technique in the Old Yiquan theory, the idea being that you could knee into your opponent's thigh with this posture. Quite how practical that is or how much power you could get into it, I'm not really sure. I've tried it on a bag and it's not easy to get that much power into it, but in push hands you can kind of dislodge someone's leg, but it's better than just randomly crashing into their leg with your leg. At least it's something. The danger is, like with all knees, you want to lean back to kind of put more power into it, and just like you always see in each one, people doing this big lean back when they're doing Shili, which is a really, really bad habit, but you see everyone doing it. But you can transform that into like a lean back punch, which is a legitimate technique as long as you're just there for a split second. Better than getting smacked in the face. Next, rear hand parry, shifting around to the side, so using close with the parry and then using that to be structurally sympathetic into open for the lead hand punch. And that means if we contract with close, then it's nice to then just expand again into open. It makes the volume of the open bigger because you've already closed up. That should be obvious, shouldn't it? It doesn't need overcomplicating. And here you can start doing things like practicing just getting in a little bit more head movement, which you're going to have to start incorporating, a little bit more movement of the torso to be harder to hit. It's in the rationale of the movement itself that the opponent is likely to be close, so you're going to likely have to create some more distance to be safe. Next, lead hand parry, stepping in, so not quite using close, just stepping in and then straight into close with the step. So we never quite get into open with the lead hand, and again landing on the back foot. And the point here is to think about the timing of everything, the way that the whole movement flows. It compounds into one movement. So the lead hand is going to land with the lead foot. It's going to flow straight away. It's structurally sympathetic for the kickback routing, straight into close. Kickback routing itself, structurally sympathetic with close in this case. And that all just flows straight into the cross and adds power and volume and fluidity into the whole posture. The lean over to the side, which in old Yiquan language they used to call it a door opening on a hinge, because it's like you're turning from the hinges on the side of your body. That moves your head out of the way and it also adds volume, power into the punch. And that's what we call everything having structural sympathy for everything else, and that creates the compounded movement. So all these elements link together into a single posture. And then just start practicing with a little bit more aliveness. Remember your footwork. We want the seeking step. Don't turn your foot over too much, otherwise it'll just take the slightest jolt to hurt your ankle. Just like the jab on the spot. See how it's phased in with the movement, with the normal jab. So we just have this kind of seeking step that has a little bit of skew on it. But if you overdo it, you risk catching your toes on the ground and the ankle pushing forwards over the foot, spraining your ankle. So it's got to be just like, it's got to be curtailed from the size of the, or hidden within the step, the size of the pivot movement. So it just lands on the ball of the foot a little bit and then skewed slightly and straight down. That also helps time it better with the punch, because the heel is going to hit the floor at the same time as the technique that you're using. And with it being the parry down, we can use a little bit of down into that as well. So we want it to hit at the same time. And remember, toes first, ball of the foot first, not the heel. And then look carefully here at how the rear foot, the heel hits down. This kind of stone cracking set just adds in that solidity to the posture at the last second. Remember, like Wang Shenjai said, even though the posture is using open, everything also has sink within it. So you can see the posture kind of sink down into the ground. And you can see how that just creates a much more solid posture. And you can flow that if you're fast enough into the next posture. It's a more advanced version of a distributed set, but we'll come back to that another time. For now, we're back to our old favourite quarter routing from the parry into the punch. The problem here is the parry is really close to the face, so you've got to get the fingers back in for the punch, and that can be quite dangerous. It might be better to use a palm. That space is too small between the parry down. Not always, but sometimes. If it is, you might not get your fingers back into a fist in time, and it might be better just to go for the push. From the rear we can get a pretty good view of the quarter routing. See how the foot comes out and then it comes out a little bit more. 1, 2, and then we start compounding it, getting it as fast as we possibly can, but there's got to be those 2 lock points. And they both use open, which you can see pretty clearly here. Making sure that there is 2 lock points, that's the hardest thing. That's one of the key elements of cultivation, compounding the movement, but nevertheless keeping those lock points within the movement. So you see this kind of little Elvis step, 1, 2. But matters then get a little bit more complicated if we want to move around, which we very often do because we want to be dynamic and on the spot, so we can't use quarter rooting like that. Instead, we've got to change how we time it with the set of the posture. And there's a few different variations here. So we're using open and then close there, and then changing open and open again, but shifting around. So 1, 2, open, and then open again into the jab. Keeping lively. But if you can pick it up now just from seeing it, then, well, that's the best way to learn. I think a lot of people don't know that Yao Zhongzun had a lot of drills for movements like this, for using footwork like this. You know, the general idea of each one tends to be a little bit dead in my experience. Nevertheless, slightly different. So lead hand with the step and then flowing straight away into the cross. We looked at it earlier, but what I want you to notice particularly is how we use the hand, like the clawing hand, and the different ways we can do that, just kind of different dimensions. Don't overdo it, and just get that articulation into the wrist and try and hit with the wrist, and then see like a tiger pouring down, and then flowing that posture itself. See, the scoop down allows you to scoop then back up with the other hand. And one of the ideas here is that if you put the power into the articulation of the wrist, then you'll be much less likely to just do a big pour down, hitting your opponent's arm and dropping your arm really low. You'll put that drop into the twist of the wrist and keep the posture high up on his arm. In theory anyway. Next, quarter rooting again, but with the rear foot. So they're both using close, and it's rear hand parry into rear hand cross. So 1, 2. Both use close, and again, not a big hit down like you always see in like MMA or something like that. Use the articulated movement to just, well, the volume is there, the volume has been replaced from the drop down into that, but your mind also feels it, so it has a tendency to help stop you from dropping the arm. Not always, as we've seen. Next, we're going to look at the echo step, but I'll look at that separately.